VP Engineering at OpenSesame, a leading figure in agile development. James is the author of The Art of Agile Development and co-creator of the Agile Fluency Model. His contributions to agile practices have earned him the Agile Alliance Gordon Pask Award. Residing in Portland, James is dedicated to advancing software development methodologies. Please, a round of applause for James Short. Come on down.
All right, hello everybody. Glad you could make it. There's a company about 5 years ago had a modestly successful product and a dozen developers. They did well during the pandemic, got some investment capital, grew rapidly, and now they have 4 products and 100 people in product engineering. The question is, how do you scale an organization like this? How do you keep everybody productive, happy, and communicating effectively? I'm James Short. I'm VP of Engineering at OpenSesame. Before that, for 23 years, I was a consultant specializing in scaling software development systems. I've been working on these sorts of questions for well over a decade. And several years ago, I came across an innovative approach called FaST. It was a little bit crazy, but also intriguing. And so I tried it, and it worked. It worked very well. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. All right, so back to our example. We've got a company that's grown rapidly. How do we organize them? One common approach is component teams. Divide your software up into technical responsibilities, then assign people to each responsibility. The problem with this is that it maximizes your cross-team dependencies, and cross-team dependencies are your worst source of delays and errors. And also, somebody always ends up with a bottleneck, which is no fun for them or the people who depend on that bottleneck. Plus, an organization of 100 people can't be divided into 4 teams. It's 2 to 3 times that. The real world is not nearly as pretty as this diagram here. It's actually more like this. This is a real diagram of a real company that had 300 people in product engineering. They had 40 component teams, and this was the dependency relationships between teams. We called it, affectionately, we called it the spaghetti diagram. Story time. This rocket is carrying the Mars Polar Orbiter. It cost $327 million, and it spent 9 months traveling to Mars. But as it entered orbit around Mars, communication was lost. The spacecraft was never heard from again. Investigations revealed that it burned up in Mars' atmosphere. What had happened was, when it arrived at Mars, it was supposed to skim the atmosphere and enter an elliptical orbit, and then it would continue skimming the atmosphere on each pass through until it had a circular orbit. But what actually happened was the orbiter's trajectory was too low, and instead of skimming the atmosphere, it just plunged into the atmosphere and burned up. Now, the reason for this is because one team software provided values in US units, and the other team's software assumed that the values were in metric units.
Not the worst, not the worst.
$327 million, countless years of work, because 2 teams couldn't talk to each other. Dumb mistake, right? No. This is what happens when you have multiple teams communicating. This always happens. There's a somewhat infamous software development project called Star Citizen. It's a video game. Years ago, they hired a third-party company to build a lot of the levels for their game. And an important concept in level design is what's called metrics. How big is everything so that your little character can fit into all their spaces? And they got the metrics wrong. And all the work that the third-party company had done had to be thrown out. Dumb mistake, right? No, this is what happened when you have multiple teams communicating. There are always delays and errors. If it can happen to NASA, it will happen to you if it hasn't already. So component teams are a bad way to go because they maximize the amount of cross-team communication, which maximizes your opportunities for delays and errors. So let's try a different approach. If we're not going to use component teams, we can use feature teams instead. They're also known as stream-aligned teams. A stream-aligned team owns a particular product or segment of a product. It's cross-functional and has all the skills needed on the team to autonomously own delivery of that value stream from end to end. And our example company has 4 products, so we can split the people up into 4 teams. We've got the legacy money maker, the big bet for the future, an opportunity to expand our presence in part of the market, and a far future bet that has yet to be successful. Now, this picture shows that the company has been divided into 4, but that's not what's actually going on. These opportunities aren't all the same size. The vast majority of the money the company makes is in the legacy moneymaker. So that's where we should be putting most of our effort. We're also putting serious money into the big future bet. The other 2 products are pretty small. We're never going to put much money into the market expansion, and the far future bet needs to find product market fit before we invest serious money into that. But now we have a problem. Some of these teams are way too big. We can turn to a book called Team Topologies. It provides ways of organizing teams so you can keep them small, 7 or so for people in each team, while still keeping them autonomous and focused on delivering value. We have streamlined teams, which is what we really want, the teams that deliver the value. And then we have enabling teams, complicated subsystem teams, and platform teams as honestly workarounds for the fact that we can't have everybody be stream-aligned. And that's what this example company did. They are a real company. And despite the mess, it worked pretty well. The teams were mostly autonomous, and folks were mostly happy. I've been using this approach for a long time. I said that I specialize in scaling software development systems, organizations, really. And I've been using an approach similar to what you see in Team Topologies for over 10 years. It's some fairly basic ideas. You want to start out with the streamlined teams, and then it's workarounds to make that work with small teams. And through that work, I've seen a number of problems come up over and over. First off, in this example company, everyone was so autonomous, silos formed. People barely interacted across teams, even in the same product. And this made it difficult to succeed at cross-team initiatives and hard to move people between teams. Second, the teams were static. When business needs changed, adding and removing people from teams was a big ordeal because they were very tightly knit and they were so autonomous and siloed. But because the teams were limited in size, new business needs often required reorganizing the team, which is a big disruption. In practice, what happened was they chose not to reorganize, which meant that the business leaders were frustrated. Why can't we have the thing we want? Why are people working on stuff that we don't care about? They didn't want to hear, well, we can't move people around, it would disrupt our progress. Specialties, specifically user experience, security, and operations, were spread too thin. They didn't need a full-time person on every team, but having people work part-time on multiple teams wasn't good either because they had constant task switching, which made it hard for people to be productive. One user experience designer told me that she spent half of her time just dealing with being interrupted and moving around between teams, and she was really unhappy. It's not a pleasant way to work when you've got that much disruption. And then finally, the teams weren't really independent. 4 of the teams shared a legacy monolith. Working in it was an ordeal. Nobody wanted to work in that code, and no team really owned that code. So quality degraded as people focused on their own areas and just said, well, that's going to disappear someday, somehow. The examples I'm providing are focused on a specific company, but like I said, this is normal. This is what I've seen happen with team topologies. I think it's inherent to the team topologies model. Now, that's not to say team topologies is bad. Up until recently, it was my go-to approach. The core idea of streamlined teams is really solid. But because the teams are small, you have to put in these workarounds to make streamlined teams work. And the more workarounds you put in place, the more problems you run into with the team topologies approach. We need to build in another direction. We need to build up, not out. Most people think of scaling as adding teams, but that's just one kind of scaling. That's horizontal scaling. You can also make teams bigger. That's vertical scaling. So let's return to our example company. Vertical scaling, that's fewer numbers of bigger teams, would allow them to consolidate their value streams. It basically eliminates cross-team dependencies. So, how do you do that? Well, that's where FaST comes in. So I'm going to describe what FaST is, and we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do audience interaction, but sort of controlled audience interaction. I believe that QR code right there will give you access to Slido. And
yeah, it's actually the hashtag up there. So that's Slido. And you can, if you haven't done that yet, please take out your phones because you're going to be able to ask questions live as he kind of queues them up.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is I'm going to talk about what FaST is, and then we're going to pause and we're going to take some questions about that topic. Then we're going to move on to the next topic, pause, take questions. So as questions come to you, put them into Slido, use that hashtag, and our MC here will be relaying the questions to me. I'll give you a moment to get your phones out. So FaST is a way of scaling up, not out, having fewer numbers of larger teams so our teams can truly be stream-aligned without all the workarounds that you get when you have lots of small teams. So what is FaST? Well, FaST was created by Quentin Cortell, and you can find more at the official website, which is fastagile.io. I have no affiliation with them other than just liking their stuff. They do have training on that site as well if you're interested, and the FaST Guide, which has all the information about what FaST is. And as the FaST Guide says, FaST is a way for people to self-organize around work that scales. Like the description, FaST is shockingly simple. There is only one ceremony that matters in FaST, and that's the FaST meeting. It's how people decide what they're going to work on and what teams are going to exist in the organization. It takes about 10 to 20 minutes, and it happens twice a week. So twice a week, you've got this large group of people called a collective, and they decide for themselves how they're going to break up into teams. Now, they don't necessarily change which teams they're on every twice a week, but they have that opportunity to do so. Let me show you how it works. First, everybody gathers in a big room. Now, every time I've done this has been with fully remote organizations, so we use a video conference in Miro, which is a collaborative whiteboarding tool. Meeting starts with announcements, just, hey, what's going on that people need to know about? And then the team leaders from the previous cycle, who are called the team stewards, describe what their teams have worked on or completed since the last FaST meeting, which was 2 to 3 days ago. Next, the product leaders, we call them product managers, describe their business priorities and how they've changed since the last FaST meeting. Often, nothing's changed, and that's what they say. What you'll see on the whiteboard is up in the upper right there, some pink stickies. Those are the business priorities. There's some priorities that are in progress, and then there's some that are up next. We call those priorities valuable increments. That's not a FaST thing, that's a me thing. Valuable increment is something that we can release that brings value to the organization. And what you're seeing is some are in progress, some are waiting to be started. So the product leads describe their business priorities, which is basically saying how has that changed, and then people volunteer to steward a team. Anybody can steward a team, but most teams are stewarded by engineers. The maximum number of stewards is limited based on the size of the entire collective. We want to average about 3 to 5 people per team. Each steward describes what their team is going to work on. Stewards are expected to work on something that advances the collective's business priorities, but they use their own judgment about what that is. Most of the time, it's going to be working on features, but it can also be things like improving the build or cleaning up the logs or really anything that, in the judgment of the engineers, will move the work forward. Usually, it's continuation from whatever was done in the previous cycle. And then finally, people self-select into the teams that they want to work on, based on what they want to work on, what they want to learn, and who they want to work with. Ultimately, they're expected to do what's best for the organization, both in the short term and the long term. Most of the time, they just continue with whichever team they were on the previous cycle. That's the FaST meeting. It takes 10 to 20 minutes, actually about 5 to 15, and that's all there is to FaST. We actually schedule half an hour for the FaST meeting. We use the rest of the time for parking lot discussions that we don't have any other place to talk about. That's it. That's FaST. It's simple, it's fast, and it's effective. People typically have a lot of questions at this point, so I'll remind you, put them onto Slido. I'll try to preemptively answer some of them, though. So I'm going to show you a real-world example. This is a composite example taken from the three real-world FaST collectives that I've worked with. To begin with, these were all remote teams, so all the action takes place on a Miro board, which we call our team room. It has 3 parts. First, the priorities in teams, which is the focus of our twice-weekly FaST meeting. Second, long-term release planning, which is the focus of the product managers. And third, task maps, which are the focus of the teams. I'm going to talk about release plans and task maps in a moment. First, let me show you what people see during the FaST meeting. So we have the business priorities here, the teams here, and a blank template here. The rest of the items are on the left. It's a place for an agenda, a place for announcements, and a parking lot for team discussions. Let's zoom in a little bit closer. So at the top here, you have the business priorities. From left to right, you can see the work that the team or the collective has completed this cycle. That's the green box. Their work in progress in the middle, and what's coming up next on the right. In the middle part, you're going to see 3 rows. The top row is for emergencies, and this team, when I took this snapshot, this team didn't have any emergencies, and that's why there's 4 smiley faces there, because there's no emergencies. The middle row is for the normal work in progress, and the bottom row is for work that's been blocked, waiting on a third party to do something. Again, at this time, there was no blocked work. On the bottom half of the screen, you'll see the teams. Top left is the on-call team, which triages issues, answers questions from the support department. This is a predetermined rotation. People don't self-select into this. It's assigned. But when the team is experiencing high demand, then additional people self-select onto that team. Next 3 teams are various engineering efforts, and just coincidentally, in this case, the final team is the product manager and UX designer figuring out work that's coming up, sort of getting their ducks in a row for engineering work to start. You'll see some orange stickies on there. Those would normally have the names of the people, on them. I've redacted that for privacy reasons. But people choose their teams by finding the orange sticky with their name on it and just putting it on the team they want to join. So the FaST meeting happens twice a week. And in the FaST meeting, you decide which teams exist and which team you're going to join. And people often think, isn't it chaos with people changing teams all the time? The answer is, well, yeah, at first it was, but in practice it's not. And the reason is generally speaking, people continue on the same teams doing the same thing that they were doing the previous cycle. It's an opportunity to create new teams and change teams, not actually creating brand new teams and changing teams every time. So this visualization shows the first 3 months of a 45-person collective that I worked with. Each row represents a FaST meeting. So between rows is about 2 to 3 days of work. And each column represents a valuable increment, a feature. The new icon represents a valuable increment starting, and the check mark means that it was finished. And the skull indicates that the increment was canceled for some reason. The dark black lines represent voluntary movement between teams. That's when somebody said, I'm going to move from this team to that team. There was also PTO and on-call rotation, but I didn't put that in this diagram because it makes it hard to read. You can see that in the first 2 weeks of this collective, this is the very beginning when they first heard about FaST, first started doing it, you can see there's a lot of movement. This was mainly due to people not having worked together before, so they were moving around trying to figure out who they wanted to work with and what topics they wanted to focus on. But as time went on, it started to settle. What you're going to see is people mainly moved because their team didn't need them anymore. Basically, the work was finished or it was wrapping up, and so they didn't need as many people on that team, and so people would move off to start new things. You'll also notice that they started delivering much more quickly. They previously had delivered something about every 2 to 3 months. Now they're working in smaller pieces and delivering something every week, sometimes multiple things per week. Now, some of that is because of the way we did our product release planning. We broke things into smaller pieces. I can't say how much of it was because of that and how much of it was because of FaST. But what FaST does for you is it allows you to focus your people with the expertise on the things that they have the most expertise on and what's most important to the business. And I think that does make the collective more effective. So that's the FaST meeting. It's the heart of FaST. It's 10 to 20 minutes twice a week, again, about 5 to 15, and then we do the rest of the half hour just doing team discussions. I found that it's pretty easy to adopt. It only takes about 2 to 4 weeks to get it down pat. That's not to say that FaST itself is easy. Actually, FaST involves a lot of teamwork, and that's hard. But the FaST meeting itself is easy. Next, I'm going to talk about release planning and the teamwork and task maps piece. But I'm going to pause here and ask, do we have any questions about the FaST meeting?
Hello, hello. Yes, we do. We have quite a few questions, as you predicted.
Yeah, it does tend to result in a lot of questions. By the way, what time are we done here so I make sure I do our timing right?
So yeah, that's the timer that we have. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Cool. All right, so the first question with the most votes. What if everyone volunteers to join the cool, shiny team, and nobody wants to join the hands-dirty bug fix team?
You know, if I had a nickel for every time I was asked that question, in the US, I'd be able to buy 2 coffees, which is a lot of nickels. I used to answer this question by saying, well, that just doesn't happen. Have a little more faith in your folks. And then I worked with a collective where it did happen. We call that scut work, the work that nobody wants to do. And honestly, it's part of your job, their job as engineers to do your fair share of scut work. And when you don't do your fair share of scut work, that's when the engineering managers who report to me get involved. So be good.
Infuse that into the culture so people understand that this is all part of our work. So then,
yeah, I mentioned to you before we got up on stage that I was working on a career ladder for this, folks. Part of the career ladder expectations for reaching basically mid-level software engineer is you do scut work. And if you don't do that, well, we're going to have a conversation.
All right, next question. Have you seen groups abandon FaST after trying it? If yes, then why do you believe that that did that?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I've done this with 3 collectives now. 1 at a company when I was a consultant, and 2 for the company that I'm VP of at OpenSesame. The stories I'm telling are sort of a mix of those experiences so that I don't give away any secrets. But that company that I worked with before I started at OpenSesame used FaST for about a year and a half and then did abandon it. The company at OpenSesame, the 2 collectives, have not abandoned it. We're about 10 months in and probably won't abandon it on my watch. The reason that first company abandoned it was not because the engineers were unhappy with FaST. Change is hard, and so people were unhappy with it at first, and the same is true at OpenSesame. But after a year and a half, they had it down. They were so successful that their parent, the company that owned this division of 45 people, said, hey, why don't we combine all the parts of this company that do what you do into one giant 200-person team? And none of the other people wanted to do FaST. And so the executives who were put in charge of this new 200-person company said, well, we don't want to rock the boat too hard. It's going to be really hard to bring FaST into all 150 new people. So we're just going to sort of organize and let each group decide how they're going to do software development. All went downhill from there. They did tell me afterwards, though, that they wish they had stuck with it. So.
Okay.
So yeah, when these sorts of things are abandoned, it's usually due to a change of leadership or something outside of the control of the people who are doing the work. If they got past the initial hump of this is not fun to, oh wow, this really works, I'm talking about any change. Changes tend to stick until executive leadership comes in and screws things up. Speaking as a VP, we do that.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of those as well. The next question is this system, if this system works when heavy domain knowledge is needed? Does this system work if you need heavy or deep domain knowledge?
That is a really insightful question. Does the system work if you need heavy domain knowledge? And that is actually one of the challenges that we've seen with FaST that I'll talk about a little bit later. Yes, the answer is yes, and there's a trick to it, which is that people tend to assume that if they're on a collective with 45 people, they have to know everything that all 45 people know. And that's not possible. And that's where that question comes from, and it is a real concern that we have to address. Let me just check my notes, see how we're doing on time.
Sure. And maybe this one might be a quick one. What is the recommended size of a team to start working in this mode?
Recommended size of a team to start working on this?
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about adoption at the end, but it needs to be big enough for you to have a FaST collective or multiple teams for it to be useful. So if you're not doing pairing, then the maximum size of your team is probably about 5 engineers. If you are doing pairing, the maximum size of your team is probably about 8 engineers. So as soon as you have more than that, then FaST might start to make sense. It's a little bit awkward, like 6 engineers, that would be two teams of 3. Mm-hmm. So there's a sort of a gray area. I'd go to pairing first and then bring in FaST after that.
Got it. So how are we doing with time?
Let's see. Let's go ahead and move on, and then we can take more questions later.
I'll go over the next ones in the next round. Can we get the presentation back? Thank you.
All right. So there's not much more to FaST than the FaST meeting, but there are other things that you have to do in a FaST collective. One of them is product management and release planning. FaST suggests using Jeff Patton's story maps for release planning, but you can use whatever you like. I'm going to talk about this really briefly because it's not really a specific thing to FaST. You just have to choose some approach and do it consistently. I use the chartering and visual planning approach for my book, which is The Art of Agile Development. In the team room, we've got the top part of the team room reserved for release planning. And if we zoom in, we see the team's charter on the left and their release map on the right. The charter has the team's purpose, which is their long-term vision, their current mission, their mission indicators, which is how do we know that we're on course to achieving the mission or not. It's useful information. And a stakeholder context diagram, which tells us who are the stakeholders that are associated with this current mission and how do they relate to the team. Charter is updated approximately every quarter. It's useful for getting everybody on the same page. I think it's very valuable. But it actually doesn't get a lot of attention between chartering sessions. We just sort of call back to it every now and then. The release map next door is where most of the action happens. That's where the product managers put their focus. This is a constantly updated map of possible work the team could do. It's organized however the product managers like. In this case, they've grouped their increments into major initiatives. Usually a question comes up about Jira at this point. So again, remember to use Slido if you have questions about release planning or task maps, and we'll take some in a moment. But the short answer is, yeah, you can use Jira if you must, if you really have to. My current product managers really like Jira, so we're using Jira. So when there's space available in the up next part of the FaST meeting board, the product managers choose any one of the valuable increments they have on their release map, and they put it in that up next. They're also allowed to reorder the things in up next as much as they want. And then when work is finished and a slot becomes available in the work in progress section, they pull from the up next. Or, again, they can pull from wherever they want, but it's nice for people to see what's coming up. And that decision is made based on what's most important given the information they have at the time. Because, of course, we learn stuff as we go, and we are adaptive to changing market conditions. That's release planning. There is a lot more I could say here, and there's a lot in my book, but it's not really specific to FaST, so I'm glossing over the details. People always ask me, though, well, how do you decide what to do next? And I was like, well, however you want to decide what you do next. But this is one way to do it. I like this way of doing it. All FaST needs is a way of deciding what's important from a business perspective. If you can figure that out, it will work with FaST. Again, if you have questions about the release planning or teamwork, put them in Slido. We'll collect them in a minute. Not just yet, though. So FaST doesn't require teams to work together in any particular way. I have found, however, that the teamwork aspect of FaST has been a challenge in the companies I've worked with. And that's because most companies don't actually have teamwork. What they have is tickets, and they have people pulling tickets from a system with a J in the title and working on them independently. They call those tickets user stories. I don't think they really are. So they pick up these tickets, they work on them independently. They own the stories or tickets sort of from end to end. That's not teamwork. That's what, if you have a toddler, it's called parallel play. That's where your little kids don't know how to socialize, so they just sit next to each other and play with their blocks. That's parallel play. It's not teamwork. So FaST expects your teams to actually work together, to coordinate with each other and help with each other's work. In extreme programming, this is called collective ownership. And I suppose you don't have to work that way, but I think it's valuable. So it's something I've introduced alongside FaST every time I've tried it. And this is the part everyone has struggled with. The FaST meeting is easy. The teamwork is hard. By default, FaST uses something called discovery trees for team coordination. I've tried them, didn't have much success with them, so I use a simpler variant called a task map, and I'm going to show you that now. So if we go back to the example team room, the bottom part of the room is reserved for the task maps. This is where the teams work. Each task map corresponds to a valuable increment, which is one of those pink stickies in the in-progress part of the board. Let's go ahead and zoom in on that. The first thing you'll notice about a task map is that it isn't just a list of tasks. It's an informative workspace. It's a rich environment showing everything the team needs to know about the valuable increment they're working on. You'll see screenshots, mock-ups, flowcharts, even code samples. When a valuable increment is ready to begin, when there's space available to start something new, a product manager, or maybe an engineer, will steward a team to get that work started. That initial team will typically consist of product manager, user experience designer, several engineers. One of the engineers will volunteer to be the valuable increment steward. They're going to be the point of contact for that valuable increment. In the FaST guide, they're called feature stewards, but we talk about valuable increments rather than features, so we call them valuable increment stewards. The valuable increment steward commits to seeing the valuable increment through from beginning to end. They're responsible for keeping up with everything that's going on with the increment. When somebody has a question about the increment, the valuable increment steward is the person to ask. When work starts on a valuable increment, the map is empty. There's nothing there other than the valuable increment, the pink sticky. Product manager describes several milestones that will demonstrate progress from their perspective. Those are user stories. They're reminders to have a more detailed conversation about what the product manager thinks this valuable increment involves. Then the whole team works together to refine those user stories further. The goal is to have stories that take 1 to 2 days to complete, but still represent the product manager's perspective. They write the user stories on blue stickies. They're not requirements documents. They're just reminders to have a conversation, so they're a sentence or two. I don't know if you can read this user story in this screenshot. It doesn't matter. It's not very good. It was very technical. This team was still learning how to create product-centric user stories when I took this screenshot. Once the user stories have been defined, the team will brainstorm tasks for the work they're going to do over the next week or two. These can be tasks for anyone, such as the UX designer, product manager, but most of them are going to be engineering tasks. Each one is only an hour or two long. It's written on a yellow sticky. You don't have to have them all figured out in advance. Some of the tasks will just be figure out what we're going to do about X, and then the stickies are added as new information comes along. When a task is complete, the sticky is turned green. If there's some sort of issue that is blocking it, it's turned red. You also notice little icons on the task. Right in the top middle, you see a little figure with a leaf on their head. That represents people. Each person has their own unique icon, and they put it on the sticky that they are currently working on. That way, everybody on the team can see what everybody else is doing, and so they know who to talk to when they need some help, and they don't have to interrupt other people to say, hey, who's working on this thing? I find that people struggle with several aspects of the task maps. First, they have trouble making small stories that still represent the product manager's perspective. Second, they have trouble breaking their work down into tasks that are only 1 or 2 hours long. Once they get the hang of it, though, they like it because it gives them a constant sense of progress as they can check the tasks off. And then third, they have trouble working together on the stories, collectively owning the results, rather than choosing stories to own and work on completely independently in their own little miniature silo. I help this process along by providing leadership training, shared leadership, so peer leadership training. But what I found works best is just plenty of time, supplemented by coaching when possible. And over the course of several months, people have started working together on their stories, but it didn't come naturally to folks. So now you've seen all the major elements of FaST. The FaST meeting, which is really the unique part of FaST, release planning, and teamwork. You can do the release planning and teamwork any way you like. You just need some way of deciding priorities, and I use release maps for that. And you need to have some way for teams to turn those priorities into tasks, and I use the task maps for that. I'm going to wrap up with recommendations for trying FaST yourself. Before I do, we've got time for maybe 1 or 2 questions on this topic.
All right. There were a couple here. It's kind of hard to measure which ones were around the release and the
Just choose one anyway.
All right, cool. So we have one actually from before we didn't get to. How do you scale this for a large project, like 150 engineers, or project teams that require months of work?
Well, I think breaking the work down into valuable increments is how you deal with work that takes a long time. Nothing takes very few valuable increments are completed in a single cycle of 2 to 3 days. Most of them take multiple weeks, and that just keeps on going until it's done. It's a continuous flow system like Kanban. How do you scale it to really large organizations? The largest FaST has been successfully used with is 65 people. I've done it with 45 as my max. My current 2 collectives are about 13 and 23 or 25 people. So at 45 people, there was plenty of headroom, definitely room to grow further than that. At 65, I wasn't part of that team, so I don't know how well it worked. The theory, though, according to Quentin, who was on that 65-person collective, just following Dunbar's number, says we can probably get it up to about 150 people total, not just engineers, but total in the collective. I don't know if I believe that, but what I would be willing to do is just keep on growing it until we ran out of space. And then that's a large enough group that you can split into multiple value streams on a single product and have those value streams truly be value stream teams rather than having to bring in all the sort of workarounds that Team Topologies brings in.
Gotcha.
So I think we're going to run out of time, so I'm going to go back and talk about the last section here, which is how do you adopt FaST? So you've seen the major pieces that you need to be successful with FaST. The heart of the FaST is the FaST meeting, where people decide what they're going to work on and who they're going to work with. FaST meeting is fed by your release plans, which you can make in any way you like, but I use charters in a release map. You also get to choose how the work is done. I prefer collective ownership, and I use task maps to make the work visible and to enable teams to work together. But again, you can do that whatever way you like. So the question is, how well does this all work in practice? Now, keep in mind, I did a team topology style effort for well over a decade. Largest group I ever worked with was 300 people in product and engineering, all on one giant product, using a team topology style approach back in 2013. And FaST completely solves the issues I saw with team topologies. It worked so well that I have stopped using team topologies as my go-to approach in favor of just having large product teams. I haven't yet had the issue where we might be too big for a single FaST collective. If I did, I'd just break into multiple value stream teams. So let's talk about each of those issues and how FaST solves them. First, when you have lots of small teams, it's hard to plan work that involves multiple teams. You've got those cross-team delays and errors, and it's hard to coordinate folks. With FaST, you have larger teams, so the cross-team issues just tend not to show up. We haven't had any at OpenSesame since we started using FaST 10 months ago. Second, Team Topologies has trouble with big business strategy changes because you have to reorganize around those new strategies, and that's really painful. That's not a problem with FaST because the F in FaST stands for fluid scaling technology, and it's really true. People dynamically adjust to whatever comes up. It's incredibly responsive. When something new comes along, people just self-select onto that thing. It's so responsive that I've had to tell the product managers, hey, it's better to finish things to start them, because they want to just keep bringing in new things. But no, it's better to finish than to start. But if we need to bring in something new, if there's an emergency, bam, we're on it. Within half a week, we've started it. Third, when you have small teams, specialists tend to get spread across multiple teams. That leads to a lot of frustration and task switching. That hasn't been an issue with FaST because the collectives are large enough so each one has a dedicated specialist. OpenSesame, we had 3 user experience designers. They were spread really thin and feeling really frustrated. Now we have 1 assigned to each collective. We've got 2 collectives and then sort of a pseudo group of teams that's going to be a collective later. And now they manage their own task switching by saying, I'm going to join this team this cycle and that team that cycle. And it's really brought down the amount of task switching involved. And then finally, shared code is no longer an issue because we've combined the teams that had shared code. That is not to say FaST is perfect. I've seen several problems occur each time I've tried FaST. They're consistent enough that I would say that these are genuine issues that you are likely to run into as well if you try FaST. The biggest is the collective ownership. Again, people are just not used to working as teams as opposed to parallel play where they're pulling tickets and being completely responsible for 1 ticket all on their own. Another thing that was alluded to in one of the questions, when a different team is responsible for some code, people are fine not knowing how that code works. But when you combine that team into a collective that contains your previous team, now people feel like, I've got to know everything that this collective works on. And that's not the case. I mean, it's not possible. So what we're doing is we're encouraging people to focus on particular parts of the code. We're saying you need to choose a specialty. And that specialty, by the way, by default, it should be the same specialty that your team previously had. That's your specialty. You can branch out if you want, but that's where you start. Even so, this has been really hard for people. They just feel uncomfortable not knowing everything that the collective is working on. And this led to a lot of imposter syndrome and sort of feelings of struggling on the team at first. It has gotten better over time, but I wouldn't say we've solved it yet, especially in our legacy code base, which has just got a lot of difficult things to understand in it. The biggest remaining issue with that is the on-call rotation for our legacy code base. People just don't feel confident in their ability to handle issues as they come in, which could come in from any part of any of the previous team's work. The good news is we used to have every team had an on-call rotation where 3 or 4 or 5 people on the team, you were constantly on call on that rotation. Now we've got 2 people on call and still less, so you've got backup, and still less need to be on the rotation, but there's more of a need to be more aware of what's going on. So we're just now trying a new solution to this one. We're giving subpoena power to the people who are on call. They have the explicit authority to ask anybody to interrupt anybody's work and say, you need to come help me. That was sort of implied before, but now we're making explicit. You have subpoena power. The trade-off is when the issue is resolved, the person who was subpoenaed and the person who asked for help, their job is now to go write the documentation they wish had existed when they exercised that subpoena power. And we're hoping that that will sort of flesh out the documentation that's missing. We're just now starting this. I don't know if it's going to work. Check back with me in 6 months, and I'll tell you. Our teams also had a really strong sense of autonomy and teamliness. When we put them together, we blew that up unintentionally. Didn't realize how badly we were going to blow it up. And a bunch of tensions that had been simmering under the covers came out. That is resolving itself over time, but if I were to do it again, I would put a lot more emphasis on team working agreements, team dynamics. Everybody assured me, oh, we love working together. It's so great being part of this company. We're so closely knit, and I believed them. So more emphasis on team working agreements, and I have seen this before in another company, so I think this is something you're likely to face. I also would have introduced the FaST meeting, but not self-selection at first, to help with that imposter syndrome that comes from having so much that you have to know, which raises tensions. Honestly, I'm not sure how much it would have helped. A lot of the interpersonal issues we've seen were there all along, even in existing teams. Change is hard, it brings these things out. And then finally, group discussions have been an issue. Large group requires experienced meeting facilitation, and most companies don't have that. One thing I've particularly introduced is consent voting, which is a way of making decisions quickly in a large group without blocking the people who want to speak. Basically, when an idea comes up, rather than discussing it, you just make a proposal without discussing it. You ask for a consent vote, and if you agree with the proposal, you put your thumbs up. If you're not sure, but you don't want to block it, you put your thumb sideways. And if you're like, no, let's have a discussion about that, or I want a revision to that proposal, then you vote thumbs down and explain your concern. This has worked for some groups, but it actually has worked well for most groups, but there's one group it hasn't worked with. They're having issues with psychological safety, and which means that people aren't voting thumbs down because they feel like they can't do that. And then retrospectives are a special type of group discussion that takes special skill to facilitate. I don't feel like this has ever worked that well with the FaST teams I've been with. It's a lot of people. It's hard for people's voices to be heard. It takes a lot of time. So I'd like to experiment with smaller formats, such as having each team do a small retro at the end of each FaST cycle, bring recommendations to the group for the consent vote. I haven't had a chance to introduce that yet. All right, well, we're running out of time here. So overall, I think FaST is worth it. If you're using team topologies, you're seeing the kinds of issues I'm talking about. FaST will solve those cross-team dependency issues. It's not perfect, but all engineering is trade-offs, and I think the benefits of FaST outweigh the disadvantages. So to try it yourself, find a couple of closely related teams working on the same product, let them know what will happen. Start using the task maps, get them used to collective ownership. Start using release planning, figure out what you're gonna do about Jira. Keep it, don't keep it, I don't care. Start using the FaST meeting with predefined teams, and then start using self-selection when people are ready. At its core, FaST is a tool for organizing large groups of people. It starts by gathering everybody in a room. Stewards describe what their teams have done since the last FaST meeting. Product leaders describe how business priorities have changed. And then people volunteer to steward teams, and everyone self-selects onto those teams. It's fast, it's fluid, and it works. It's the most effective approach to scaling I've yet seen. If you're in an environment where being great is more important than being safe, I encourage you to give it a try. Thank you very much.
All right, all right.